Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to tonight's show. This is a very special one. I have an old friend, I said old, a seasoned friend, Lester Lefkowitz, who is a teacher at ICP, and he did many events with us when I worked for B&H Photo, producing large-scale events and in the event space. And I always knew Lester as like that consummate professional photographer. Les did really good during this heyday of the 80s and 90s photography here in the New York City region. And I even heard a rumor that Les put a hole in his ceiling so that he could have beautiful light coming through, the beautiful daylight coming through a skylight. Did you build a skylight into a studio?
No, that's not true. What I have is I have a room on top of my studio, and I put a hole in the floor so I could shoot down through the hole when I wanted to have far away from vertical shots. So that is what the hole is about. It's not for light, it's for shooting.
For shooting, okay. I'll stay correct. I won't even tell you who told me that one. But so photography can be difficult. There are many things to master in photography. And I even made a social media post about all the facets and how, like, just when you figure out one piece of photography, there's another piece. In this case, I was talking about street photography, from moving from studio shooting to street. It's really quite an interesting thing. But back in the day, something that really amazed me were macro photography. And I was into macro photography at the time. And the little surprise for you here, Les, we have a Canon T90 camera. And on that T90, we've got a 100 macro. And if that 100 macro isn't good enough, we have an FD5D2 to put on an extension tube. So macro photography is close to my heart and is always just an amazing thing. A little one-to-one reproduction on that Canon T90 and that 100 macro with the extension tube. Without the extension tube, it wasn't one-to-one. But if anyone wants to even understand what I'm babbling about, you're going to want the 2-volume set, which is all things close-up and macro photography covered. This is such a serious, these tombs are textbooks. They're being incorporated into the RIT library as mandatory reading. And I understand also that Les had another series of volumes that was back in the day, was one of the go-to, right? Did you have another close-up?
Well, the precursor to that was 45 years ago. And that was the definitive book in the field at that time. It's terribly outdated, but it's still available on Amazon as a used book, believe it or not. Don't buy it. It's really old.
Get the new one. We have links to Les's website, and this is self-published, and it's pretty amazing. And I have to say, it is comprehensive. And I love good, thick photography textbooks, because if you want to do something, there's a chapter that it's covered in this book, and Les's wisdom is both contagious, well executed, and explanatory. So without further ado, I'd like to turn this over to you, Les. Are you ready?
I am ready, sir.
Okay,
so go ahead.
You've been made a co-host, so anytime you're ready to do a screen share,
okay,
you're all ready for that.
Okay,
and just also welcome. We've got some great people here. We got the Kleins. Good to see you guys. That's so amazing. Love it. And so I thought, I see many familiar faces here. This is like the event space at B&H Photo. No, it's a full house. Wow, you got a ton of people here for you. I'm going to shut up and let you take it over.
Okay. Well, chatting with David for a while, he told me that he's got a very sophisticated group of patrons, that you all are experts in landscape photography, portrait photography, baby photography, aerial photography, real estate photography, but none of you know diddly squat about close-up and macro photography. So today, in about 40 minutes, I'm going to tell you everything in the world that's in those 2 books, which is absolutely not true. My goal today is just to give you kind of an overview of what's possible and how you can get into it, and hopefully get you as excited about what you can see when you're close up as I do. I mean, I like the final picture, But to me, the fascinating part is being out in the field and looking at nature, looking at insects, looking at flowers, looking at butterflies. I mean, it's just fascinating to see the detail that you can't see with the naked eye. So that's a pretty easy to remember website. It's just macrophotographer.net. And if you go there, there's lots of links and lots of pretty pictures. It's all started with David because I just published these two books. And these books have, between the two of them, they have 1,700 new photographs. And no one is leaving today until we go through every single one of them. Every picture you will see in this little presentation has come from the books. Volume 1 is called The Basics, and it's about getting started. Volume 2 is very advanced and probably not appropriate for anybody right now. What is popular among almost all people I know who like close-up photography is everyone likes to photograph insects, and they certainly are fascinating to look at. The detail that nature has created is just startling, and no matter how close you get, there's just more and more to look at. Caterpillar, of course, and you can see it's nibbling on a blade of something or other. Some kind of a fly. By the way, some people really know what all these things are and they know the Latin names. All I say is it's an insect. That's as much as I know about it. Butterflies are another popular topic. And in fact, I would suggest if you want to start photographing little animal life, that unlike small creepy crawly insects, butterflies are a lot larger, probably easier to start with. Equally popular to insects, of course, are flowers. And a good macro or close-up photograph of a flower, again, lets you see detail that you can never see with the naked eye. And it's just spectacular what nature has created, and it's just unending. One of my favorite places to get flowers is from the local supermarket. You know, at Whole Foods, they've got great selections, and Trader Joe's also has a great selection of flowers. So in the middle of winter and you want to photograph flowers, that's where I get them from. Some people like to photograph roses. I like to photograph the thorn. It's more fun. Besides insects and flowers, if you live near an aquarium, this is called an egg yolk jellyfish. Again, the detail what nature makes is startling to me. It's just a little piece of bamboo, just a little joint in the bamboo. It's kind of a cool way to look at it. If you know where there's a store that sells crystals and minerals, I know there are a bunch of them in the city. You can pick up a very inexpensive slab, and it's a translucent. And again, the coloring, the coloration, the detail just goes on and on and on. If you happen to be outside in the winter and you come across a puddle, well, there's another opportunity to do some kind of an abstract. I am fortunate on Long Island, there are 2 butterfly vivariums. There's one 10 minutes from my house and one out in Riverhead. And to watch butterfly emerging from a chrysalis is a thrilling event. This whole thing happens in about 1 minute, that the butterfly wiggles out of this. It stays around for a minute or two to dry its wings, and then it flies off. The metamorphosis is amazing, absolutely amazing. All around New York, you're going to find graffiti on concrete. There's a possible subject matter. Maybe you have a collection of silk scarves. Another possibility, very colorful, looks interesting, all folded up. And probably everyone's favorite subject, of course, is buttons. So you can photograph buttons. Ready. So from the cucumber, we went to corn on the cob, right? I bet you've never looked at it this closely. And along with your corn on the cob, maybe you'll want a Swiss cheese sandwich. Isn't that fun?
And Les, I'm sorry that, could you go back to that picture before the corn on the cob? Nope, you're on the cucumber.
Right, you got the cucumber?
Yep, you go one more forward.
Corn on the cob?
I just want to say it's a really corny picture.
Oh, David, really?
I'm sorry.
We have to put up with David. You'll excuse him. Right, I know. And there's the Swiss cheese. I've shown this picture to a lot of people, and most people don't know what it is until I tell them. It's kind of fun. Pistachio nuts. I'm sure you've all nibbled on pistachio nuts. And this time of the year, what's the favorite fruit in all the supermarkets? But strawberries. Animals are another possible topic. There's a little farm around here, and there's a zebra. And I'm sure many of you right near your house probably have a giraffe, and you can photograph in the giraffe's tongue. So again, all things that are not the usual bugs and flowers, but things that are possible to photograph. And if you don't mind getting dirty and getting down on your belly, of course, mushrooms are just spectacular. At the right time of the year, it's just wonderful stuff to find. But without going outside and getting dirty, one of my favorite places to photograph is in my kitchen. I've got nice big sliding glass doors, but you don't need doors that glass that big. You can just use a nice big window. And the nice thing is there's no wind, so the flowers don't move. You won't get dirty by being down on the ground. And if it's raining and snowing outside, you can still photograph. So it's really a great hobby any time of the year. And these are some pictures that I made just by the light coming through that glass door. Very simple to do on a tripod. Absolutely, I know many of you hate tripods, but believe me, when you're doing close-up work, you'll find it is your friend. Again, all with window light. Here's another picture from the book. This is a sliced in half chambered nautilus shell, a stack of books to hold a background cloth. Just let the soft light come in. By the way, generally you don't want sunlight. Cloudy or north-facing window is best, and you can make a picture like this. It's really easy to do, and there's no one rushing you. There's no wind blowing things around. Now, what's fun, what I tried to do with the book is not just have pretty pictures, and lots of close-up books have pretty pictures, but I really went to a lot of trouble to show people how it was done. And because everything was shot just for the book, I was able to show the pretty picture and also how it was actually shot, which I believe is very, very helpful. So here's mushroom that was shot. And here's Andrea down on her belly. This is exactly what's involved. She's using her elbows to brace the camera. And we spent a few hours with these mushrooms one day. This was in Spain, I believe. When we talk about more advanced work with flash, there are pictures of exactly what to use, not just words, but it shows you what the equipment looks like. And then if you use this kind of flash, this is the results you get. So it's how to do it. This is the results. And this is the equipment that was used, which I believe is very, very helpful. Stability is very important. When you magnify an image, you're also magnifying your own shake. And as I tell people, if your heart is beating, you will shake a little bit. And as you get more magnified, the shake becomes more apparent. So stability is important. This is a trick that a lot of people use. It's just like a broom handle. And you can grab both the camera and the broom handle, and that gives you a lot more stability than just hand holding the camera by yourself. And there are other ways, of being stable. Here's Andrea with her elbow on her knee, which is a big help, or just sitting down and again, using your knees for stability. If you're using a tripod, there are many different ways of getting low or high, depending on your equipment and on your tripod. I know most people like to shoot handheld because it's fast and easy, but if you want really fine results on things that aren't moving, you can't use this for insects, but you can certainly use it for flowers. And it shows in the book the various ways things look when you use the different attachments. So this is a series of extension tubes. And instead of talking about working distance, which is the distance from the front of the lens to the subject, you can really get a feel for what it is depending on what equipment you're using and what magnification that you want. This is a beautiful water lily infested with little insects. And while it's a pretty picture, again, it also shows how it was photographed. So you get a sense of where these pictures came from and what kind of trouble I went to make them. The book is called The Manual of Close-Up and Macro Photography. And people say, well, what's the difference? Isn't everything macro? And in general, common wisdom is anything that's close, people today are calling it macro, but it's officially incorrect. If you have a regular camera lens, not a close-up or a macro lens, you can focus to what we call about 1/10 life size. What does that mean? It means you can photograph a dozen eggs before the camera will focus any closer. Now, it somewhat depends on the camera and the lens, but that's kind of a ballpark. So we call that 1/10 life size or 0.1x. And what it means is this subject is 10 times bigger than its image on your sensor. So it's 1/10 the size of the actual picture that's on the sensor. Now, what if you want to get closer? Well, there are three ways I'm going to suggest you can try. The first one is to get some close-up filters, which are effectively a magnifying glass that goes on the front of any lens. And you'll hear me say in a few minutes, I really recommend this is a great, inexpensive way to get started with whatever you have today. Or you can use extension tubes. Extension tubes are like a donut. They're kind of hollow inside, there's no glass, and they go between the camera body and the lens. So it takes an ordinary lens and turns it into, quote, a macro lens. And if you've got a big budget, then sure, you can go full hog and get yourself a true macro lens. And these are all just different focal lengths, and I'll go over that in a minute. So we go back to our dozen eggs, which I said is about 1/10 life size. And if you add close-up filter and extension tube where you have a macro lens, you can go to 1/4 life size. Or you can go closer. This is 1/3 life size. This is half life size. And finally, with most macro lenses, you can go to 1x. 1x means that the size of the top of the cracked eggshell is exactly the same size as its image on the camera sensor. So now we're at true 1-to-1, also called life size. The subject and the image are the same size. So officially, the close-up range goes from as close as a normal lens goes all the way to 1 up. That's considered the close-up realm. And it's subjects that are about, pardon me, about 1.5 inches wide. If you have a smaller frame camera like APS-C or Micro Four Thirds, then you're talking about 1 inch or 3/4 of an inch. But that at 1x, the subject size is the same size as your sensor. If you have a full frame camera, at 1x, you're looking at something that's 1.5 inches wide. Now, if you want to get into the true macro, the official macro range, now we're greater than life size. That means that the image on the sensor is actually bigger than the subject is in real life. And you can get up to 20 times life size before you need a microscope. This is very advanced. I am not going to show you how to do that today. That's in volume 2. So this is a sunset moth, and you may be able to get this close depending on your camera. Instead of 0.1x, it's 0.2. But if you want to get really close, you need specialized equipment. This is already 2 times life size. This is 5 times life size. It's just startling to see what a butterfly or a moth looks like. We're not done. This is 10 times life size. Is that gorgeous or what? I mean, it's just thrilling to see this. This is 20 times life size. Did you know that the scales like this make up a butterfly or a moth? Until you see it, it's impossible to imagine that. And not only that, you can crop this. This is like the equivalent of 40x. So this is, to me, just thrilling to see this. This is very hard to do. You will not be able to do this tomorrow. But I'm just showing you what the possibilities are in the long term with macro photography. Now, you should know this, right? Everyone throws out the term macro because it's cool, it sounds high tech, but most of the time they just mean close up, not macro. And so you should be aware that it isn't not proper to use it in some states. There's nothing I can do. Everyone likes to use the word macro when they mean close up. It doesn't matter. What matters is the pictures. So how do you get started? Well, that's what volume 1 is about. And it's called the basics, magnification to 1x. And for you getting started, this is all you need. And so there's a whole chapter on the close-up filters. Let me tell you a little bit about those because I think this is a great way for all of you to get started. you can buy these inexpensive kits. It's literally like a magnifying glass that you might have on your desk. It's just a single piece of glass, screws onto the front of any lens. And these kits come in strains, typically 1, 2, 4, and 10. Those are called diopters. That's how you measure the power of a close-up filter. And believe it or not, you can get a whole kit of these for about $15. That's a 62 millimeter size. Maybe your lens is 58 or 67. And this will get you going really, really well. By the way, these, you can find these B&H, Amazon places. The same kit you'll see for $25, $42. I wouldn't waste my money. Get the least expensive ones. They're fine for getting started. There's no end of being able to spend your money more for better stuff. And so how do these things work? Well, here's a kit of 1, 2, 4, and 10. And if you want to know what magnification they gives, it turns out that, as you would expect, the weak ones, the +1s, give you very little magnification. And the very strong ones give you a lot of magnification. But there's more to it than that, because the magnification you get depends on the focal length of the lens that you're using. Now, you could use a zoom lens, or you could have individual lenses. It doesn't matter. So if you want to see what magnification you get, if you put a close-up filter on a wide-angle lens, you get very little magnification, but you're going to be very close to the subject. If you put that same, say, +4 on a long lens, you get extremely strong magnification. And so generally, people tend to use these close-up filters on slightly longer lenses. I mean, you can use it on the wide-angle lens, but you'll get little magnification. But what the heck, once you have a kit of these, you can just play with it and see. So again, the power of a close-up filter will be much stronger with a longer lens and will be quite weak with a lower lens. Best thing to do is don't pay attention to what I'm saying. You screw it on the lens, see what happens. That's the way to learn. Now, with close-up filters, of course, once you screw it on your lens, you can no longer photograph the things far away. You have to unscrew it to do that. If you have a zoom lens, what's cool is that with the same filter screwed on, as you zoom the focal length of the lens, you're going to get more or less magnification. That is very cool, very convenient. And it works again with any camera. You do not need a fancy interchangeable lens camera. Since it doesn't give you much magnification with the wide-angle lenses, in general, people tend to use these with medium to long focal length lenses. I mean, some people use it out in the field with a 300 millimeter zoom lens. It's remarkable how much magnification you can get with good working distance. So people are out in the field photographing small animals or nature or landscape. They carry one of these little things in their pocket, and when they see something small close up, you just screw it on your long zoom lens, and now you got a quote a macro lens. That's something that's just been in your pocket that cost a few bucks.
Hey, Les.
Yes, question.
I got a question for you.
Yes, sir.
Stephen Kolb is asking, can you stack those close-up filters?
Well, it depends what state you're in. All right. The right answer is yes. You can put a +2 and a +1 together and get a +3. Absolutely. Very good question. That is really true. But you've got to be careful, though, is depending on how the rim is made, some of them, when you put them together, the glass actually bangs into each other. That's bad. So when you try to screw them together, be very careful before you assemble them like that. And by the way, if you really want to know, the stronger one should be closer to the lens. So if you put a +2 and a +1 together, put the +2 on first, and then put the +1 on top of that. So that's a good question. Glad that was asked.
Thanks.
And these lenses aren't the greatest quality. And so to eliminate some distortion and a chromatic aberration, I strongly recommend you use the smaller f-stops. If you want to try large f-stops and get something very dreamy and ethereal, what the heck, open the lens all the way, and then you'll just learn how it looks. But if you want a little better quality, use the small apertures. Now, the good thing is, as I'm trying to push you, is that it's an inexpensive investment to try things out, you know? And if you don't like it, you spend 20 bucks. So I think it's a fun way to get started. Now, if you want to go a little further and spend a little more money, the cheap ones are cheap, and you can get a much better version of these. These are called achromats. And instead of being a single piece of glass, they're 2 or 3 separate lenses. And they do actually significantly better quality, especially around the perimeter. They have less chromatic aberration. And if you get serious about this, then you might want to get the better ones. But to start out with, get the cheapos, see how you like it, learn how to focus, learn how to get the magnification. So I got a series of pictures here I've taken with one of these close-up filters. I have a 55 to 200 millimeter zoom lens, and I use it a lot, especially for things like butterflies, because it gives me lots of working distance. It's very easy to change magnification. I don't need a macro lens to do this. In fact, I prefer the longer focal length of the zoom lens. It gives me more working distance, and it's much more versatile in terms of quickly changing magnification. These were all done with a close-up filter on my standard zoom lens. And you can see the image quality is fine. This is not a butterfly. And of course, you can use it for flowers. This was taken at the National Botanical Garden in Washington, D.C. And I bet many of you have been to Washington, but I bet no one has been there. And it's just a few blocks from the Capitol. You really should go and see it. It's a spectacular place. It's called the National Botanical Garden. And this is just I think this is called an elephant ear plant. And it's just strong sunlight. And it's just beautiful. Fascinating to see how things are put together in nature. Now, I told you these are not usable, the close-up filters for wide-angle lenses. So of course, I broke all my rules. And I put a +10 on a wide-angle lens. And I love this. It's totally distorted and out of focus, but it's really sharp in the middle. And so, don't listen to anything I say. Just go out and play with the stuff. Now, I'm literally about 2 inches away from, I think this is an iris. But, it made a fun picture. I think it's more than fun. I think it's kind of nice. Or, if you use it on a longer lens, you'll get really sharp image quality, and you can make pictures like this. So a very versatile tool, strongly recommend it. I use it myself. Now, close-up focusing is trickier than the real world. Most of you use autofocus, you go out, and most people don't even think about focusing anymore. David and I grew up in the days, David, remember manual focus?
I certainly remember manual focus.
Right.
Yes.
And so when I started teaching recently, a few years ago, I had to explain to people that when you press the shutter button, the camera has to focus. You don't do it yourself. The camera does it for you. But you're not used to having to focus very often. And in close-up photography, you are going to have to focus, because the depth of field is so narrow. We're talking about ½ an inch sometimes, or less, as you get to higher magnification. And if you get to really high magnification, the depth of field is measured in millimeters. That's why I recommend don't start at high magnification. You will get frustrated easily. So here's how you do it. If possible, lean on something, because again, you got to be steady. Not easy to hold still and steady. I know you hate tripods, but close-up photographers use them a lot. And the most important thing in this business is patience. It is not going to be as offhanded, it's easy to do as conventional street photography or landscape photography. Autofocus, a lot of people try it, doesn't work so well, because as you are moving in and out a little bit, the camera is trying to focus and it's chasing its tail. If you're not at high magnification, just a little bit close up, you might try it, but make sure you set for spot focus, because so little is in focus. You want to make sure what little is in focus is where you want it to be and not where the camera wants to be. So if you want to try autofocus, set your autofocus to spot focus, not general overall focus. Or the camera will usually focus on the nearest thing, which probably is not what you want. So we generally use manual focus, turn off autofocus. Now, if you're using a tripod, you position the tripod kind of roughly where you have to be, and then you turn the focusing ring on your lens. If you're hand holding, we use a method called gliding back and forth. What you do is you set the magnification, you use a particular filter, extension tube, macro lens, and you move back and forth until it's in focus, and it looks something like that. And when you're in focus, then you go click, and you move back and forth and try it again, try it again. Absolutely try it a few times. There's usually one that's sharpest. And so it's up to you to find the focus point and go click gently. That's how you focus with close-up photography, not by turning the lens. I see people putting a close-up filter on and they start cranking the focusing ring or the zoom ring. Don't do that. Leave the focus alone, leave the zoom alone, and just move in and out until it's in focus. If you're too close or too far, yes, you can change the focal length on the zoom, leave it at that new focal length, and move in and out again. Don't mess with the focusing ring. You'll just be chasing your tail and get very frustrated. This is the way to do it.
Hey, Les, I got a quick question for you. This is from my own. I've been mystified by just how good mirrorless cameras are these days. Your approach, is it with a DSLR or with a mirrorless camera? And if it's mirrorless, how are you establishing focusing, or using a focus peaking, or a really like a focus on one pixel kind of thing?
No, well, in general, for people starting out, I would just focus with the whole frame. You know, you can see it. Now, if you're really fanatical and you have a mirrorless camera, you know, you can get a magnified view in the middle of the viewfinder, and that is a little more accurate. You can do it that way. There's something called focus peaking on, again, modern mirrorless cameras, where the sharp edges turn a color, blue, green, yellow, and that says those edges are in focus. And that's a very nice focusing aid if your camera happens to have focus peaking. But for initially getting started, don't use super high magnification. Just move in and out and you get the feel of it. And then if you want, you can use the magnified view in the viewfinder, or you can use focus peaking.
Gotcha. I thought I might be able to stump you with a newfangled mirrorless camera.
You're trying on the wrong guy. Okay, so that's the way I'm suggesting you get started to do close-up pictures, is use these close-up filters. But another way that some people like to use is called extension tubes. And as I told you, it's like a donut. It just is a ring that goes between the camera body and the lens. So of course you need interchangeable lens cameras now. And they come in sets, usually of 2 or 3. And you can use them individually. And as someone asked before, yeah, you can stack them together. So the 12 millimeter and the 20 millimeter, you can put them together and get 32 millimeters. Or you can stack this whole set together and you can get 68 millimeters, I think is the number. So you can mix and match them. Now, definitely get the automatic tubes. You will see very inexpensive ones that are manual. Do not start with those, because you lose the communication with the camera. You lose a little bit of autofocus if you want, and you lose the ability to set the aperture. So you would need a lens that has a manual aperture, and most modern lenses do not. The aperture is set in the camera body. So definitely get automatic tubes. And there's camera mount specific. The camera manufacturers, Sony, Canon, Fuji, blah, 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 they all make their own. But there are a number of third-party ones that are pretty good and about half the price. But make sure it's specific for your camera mount. Now, how do they work? Well, extension tubes come in different thicknesses or different lengths. And to determine the magnification, as you would expect, the skinny tubes provide only a little more magnification, and the very long tubes provide stronger magnification. Kind of makes sense. But what happens with the focal length of the lens? Well, again, you can go from wide angle to telephoto, and now what happens is it's upside down. Turns out that if you put a very thin tube on a 200 millimeter lens, you get almost no increase in magnification. You take that same skinny tube and put it on a wide angle lens, and you get enormously more magnification. So this is just the opposite of the close-up filters. So again, with a short focal length lens, the extension tubes do a lot. With a long focal length lens, they only do a little more and everything in between. Again, like the close-up filters, you can't focus far away anymore. But like the close-up filters, as you zoom the zoom lens, it's going to change the magnification, which is handy. And of course, you've got to be able to take the lens off your camera to make this work. Unlike the close-up filters, which we said work best with longer lenses, the extension tubes are really more practical with the shorter focal length lenses. You can use them with long lenses, but you need a lot of tubes, and then it gets very, very unwieldy. But if you have a long lens and you want a little more magnification, then be my guest, then they work fine. They do provide better image quality than the really cheap close-up filters, no doubt about it. But compared to the more expensive close-up filters, they're about the same. And some people will swear one is better than the other. I don't get into that argument. But again, unless you want something really dreamy and ethereal, I would use smaller f-stops. And then the last possibility, of course, if you've got the big budget, is to get yourself a macro lens. And macro lens has one tremendous advantage, because the macro lens can be used to focus landscape and far away, or all the way up to 1x just by cranking the focusing ring. So you can start out by photographing these cute little girls having a water pistol fight, and then quickly turn the focusing ring, and you can do a tight shot like this, or you can zoom in on the water pistol and get almost a 1x shot like this, all within a few seconds. So that's one tremendous advantage to working with macro lens. You don't have to attach a filter. You don't have to take it off the camera and put an extension tube. It's very, very convenient. But, you know, $900 plus.
Les, I want to agree with you 150%. Being a camera counter guy, I've always said, like, you want to shoot macros, close-ups, that's great. Do you want to do portraits? Yes. And they're actually, it's not so expensive. I think like Tamron 90 millimeter 2.5 Sigma 105s, they're like 500, 600 bucks.
Yeah, there's a slide that actually says that, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and a lot of people do use it for portraits. That's what's nice. It's slightly telephoto, and it's a great portrait lens. It's macro, or you can use it to photograph landscape out west.
Totally. So
they're very versatile, but they're a lot more expensive than a $15 set of close-up filters. That's all. So if you've got a lizard crawling up the outside of your basement, again, with the macro lens, you can quickly go from here, or you can go to there. You know, again, very, very versatile. So the macro lens is great because you can focus from far to near very quickly. Of course, it is specific to your camera. And absolutely get an automatic one to start. There are manual, inexpensive, but very high quality optically macro lenses. I do not recommend them when you're getting started. So we just talked about, right? It's convenient as a portrait lens, right? And of course, if you want the ultimate image quality, even with the lens wide open, that's what you're paying for. And there's no distortion, straight lines come out straight, which is usually not an issue in close-up photography. As David just got ahead of me, mentioned that while Nikon, Sony make their own macro lenses, Tamron, Sigma, Tokina make very fine macro lenses for much less money. There is no such thing as a bad macro lens. Every macro lens is fine. There are bad macro pictures, but not bad macro lenses, be sure. And so they're available in normal focal length, slightly long, and a few very telephoto. My recommendation, I think most people would tell you the same thing, is get these slightly longer focal lengths, which is to make good general purpose macro lenses, depending on the type of camera you have. And eventually you're all around 100 or so millimeters. It's a little bit long, but gives you more working distance. So if you're into macro lens, this is my recommendation. Some things to think about. That's all I can tell you. I've mentioned it a few times, hasn't changed. This is what I recommend when you get started. Don't run out, don't decide you're going to go to an arboretum tomorrow right after you buy the filters. And that's also a good bit of advice. You may look at my pictures and say, wow, Lester, those are really nice. Those are really sharp. What you don't see is the 50 others that aren't so sharp. The flower moved in the wind, the insect moved, I didn't nail my focus properly. In this business, luckily, film is cheap with digital cameras. So take advantage and shoot the same scene a few times. And then when you go back and examine it, you'll see, oh yeah, one is better. And also, depth of field changes with aperture is very prominent in close-up photography. It's big differences. So if you take a picture at f5.6 versus f16, the picture's totally, totally different. And you want to get a feel for how that works, because sometimes people like really shallow depth of field, so just the tip of the flower is in focus, and that could be very nice. Or maybe you want more things in focus and you'll shoot at f22. So experiment for sure with different apertures. As I told you, as you magnify the scene, you're going to magnify your unsteadiness. Sometimes if you're hand holding, you'll want to use a higher than normal shutter speed than you're used to out in the street. And if necessary, it's more important to use high shutter speed if you have to raise the ISO. It's better to have a little noise in the picture than one that's blurry. And then when you're done, don't look at the picture on the back of the camera. It's not going to tell you anything. If you want to see if you really nailed it, you got to bring it into your computer or tablet and look at it nice and large. And then that will make you feel bad.
Hey, Les.
Yeah.
Can I just throw something in as a little on the slide before, the other fatherly advice slide? Raise the ISO. I'm a big proponent of auto ISO. Set it for like 3200 because it's really good, even 6400. But then do the minimum shutter speed, a 500th of a second, if you feel really steady at 250th. And then it will automatically just give you that minimum shutter speed with the best ISO. And it really works out. It works out really good. I'm a big fan of it. How do you feel about that?
That's a good point, David. That's a very good point. But you want to set the shutter speed because you're in charge of that, and then let the camera adjust the ISO as necessary. And one less thing to deal with, and that's very smart. I would go along with that.
Right on.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, and of course, as we said,
by the way, you're doing really good, Les. Just want to say that you've had 100 people. The Zoom is jammed. It's full, and people are emailing me. I can't get in because there's too many people. Will there be a recording of this? Of which I said yes.
Right.
In about a week, there'll be a nice recording.
I think I'm just fortunate because people are bored today and they had nothing to do at 6 o'clock.
Well, you're a good looking guy. Let's leave it at that.
Of course.
You got genetics on your side.
Right.
Right,
okay.
good.
So again, back to this. I like to repeat this over. Let me do this again, right? You got to do this over and over. It's a different mindset than you're used to with your regular photography. This is not a pastime for impatient people. That's all I can say. All right, so David pushed me to do a little bit about focus stacking, just so people have heard about it. Not that I'm going to teach you how to do it, but I'm going to show you what it's about, because it is the greatest thing in the world, as it says here. It has changed how close-up and macro photography is done. Images are made today that were just not even conceived of 15, 20 years ago before this came about. And it's all because of digital photography. You could not do this with film. What it allows you to do is have what we call infinite depth of field. Now, it's not quite infinite, but it's also used by landscape photographers, by the way. So they want to photograph a flower in the foreground, a lake in the middle ground, and mountains 3 miles away. And you can't do that in conventional photography with one exposure. But if you make 3 separate pictures and combine them in software, now the whole world is in focus. And that's the way it works in close-up photography, where it's even more urgent since we have such shallow depth of field. Not for you right now, just to show you what it looks like. So what you do is you make a series of exposures, a little close, a little further away, a little further away, a little further away, you do a whole bunch of them. Generally, you do it manually, either turning the focusing ring or moving in and out or using something called the focusing slide. Many of the modern digital cameras, mirrorless cameras, can also do it automatically. You put the camera on the tripod and you tell the camera, here's the beginning point, here's the end point, and I want 12 pictures in between. And you just press go, and it makes 12 separate exposures, each one of the slightly different focus point. But I do a lot of mine manually. And you have to have a subject that's not moving when you do this, including flowers that are blowing in the wind. Got to turn off autofocus, turn off exposure. Everything has to be manual because every frame has to look exactly the same in terms of exposure, white balance, all that kind of stuff. And in fact, David, that's where I would turn off auto ISO, because as it sees different parts of the scene, you might get a slightly different auto ISO. Now, then you get these 5, 10, 15, 100 shots back at your computer. You load it into your computer, and this magic software finds the sharpest pixels in each frame, just those, and combines it with the sharpest pixels in the next frame, and magically, literally, without any hands-on, puts it together. If you happen to own Photoshop, Affinity Photo, Luminar, it can actually do it in those programs. You don't have to buy anything extra. And if you're getting started, that's the way to go. If you don't have that and you want to invest in dedicated focus stacking, there are two well-known brands, Helicon and Zarine, and you can buy them at different price levels. You can get a free 30-day trial if you get serious about this stuff. Olympus actually makes a camera that not only makes the individual frames, but it actually combines them inside the camera and comes out with a combined JPEG. The only brand I know of that does that. Most of us do it when we get home. Now, here's what it looks like. So you focus on the first thing in the foreground and go click. Don't change any camera settings except you move the focus to the next spot. So that's the middle ground. And then again, without changing any exposure, you move it to the background. And then you bring it into the software, hocus pocus focus, boom, everything is in focus. It is that simple back at the ranch. It is amazing. You will fall off your chair when you see it the first time. And this is some pictures that I've taken. Andrew and I found this fungus in the woods in Massachusetts. And you can see it is needle sharp from the very foreground all the way to the back. You could not ever do this with a single exposure. I'm guessing this is on a tripod, maybe a dozen frames, I'm guessing. Here's one that's much smaller. This little guy is maybe 3/4 of an inch left to right. And you can see everything from the tip of his antenna all the way to the hind legs are all in focus. This may be a stack of 95, 120 individual frames.
And Les, on that 95, 125 frames, you didn't slip in a picture of my mother-in-law in that software, did you?
Oh, is that, that's not nice, David, really.
That's how, I love my mother. My Sawatcha, I love my Sawatcha. Right. Carry on, thank you.
Okay, so this is for high magnification. This is probably taken at about 5 or 10x. And this is where you desperately need focus stacking, or you could never get a picture like this. But if you're more into broccoli, that's what broccoli looks like. And this is maybe only 10 individual shots as opposed to 100. So as the magnification increases, you need more smaller increments. If you happen to have a potato sitting out on your counter for about 4 or 5 months, all sorts of cool stuff starts to grow. And you can see, again, everything is in focus only because of the focus stacking. Otherwise, this would be impossible. And one of the last ones here is my lawn in front of my house had heavy dew one morning, and there was a spider web inside, and I got down to my belly, and again, a stack of maybe 10 or 15 different exposures. You can see how the lawnmower lopped off the top of the blades of grass. It's kind of cool to see that. And of course, it's wonderful with flowers because you can see every single detail. You know, I mean, look at the hairs on the stem on the left side and the details in the stamen and pistil. It's phenomenal to see this stuff. That's the fun part of it. So that's all the pitches that I'm going to show you. Again, as a reminder, if you want to see more pitches, there's my website, just macrophotographer.net, and that will take you to this homepage. And if you're a glutton for punishment and you'd like to purchase the books, if you click here, there's a link to the books. If you live in the States, you can buy them through Amazon, no problem. If you happen to be overseas, then there's a link to eBay. eBay is set up to ship the stuff. I've sold books in Denmark and Germany and the UK and Greece. But I can't do that for many reasons through Amazon. And so that's all I got to say, David.
That was thorough as expected, and you held everyone's attention. I gave some of the good questions out there.
Yeah, let me hear.
Well, okay, so our friends who used to be here in New York City says, this is Carol Ann and Louis Klein. Can the tube be a bagel instead of a donut?
You want a plain bagel, because if you get an everything bagel, all the seeds fall off and get on the camera.
Ooh, okay, you have to clean that off.
Yeah,
that won't be good. So one big question is that this was recorded, and in about a week we're going to put it on our YouTube, and there'll be an email the same way you found out about this, directing you towards the YouTube. So yes, there will be a replay. It'll be great. Okay, so here's a good question for you from Victoria Folk. What tripod head do you use?
Well, does she live in the city?
I don't think I'm not too sure who Victoria Folk is.
If you go to the B&H website, there are literally scores of tripods. You know, so I always tell people, if you live anywhere near the city, go to B&H and try them all out. I mean, you can buy tripods anywhere from $45 on Amazon to, you know, a few $1,000s if you want really high-end stuff. So I don't want to recommend a tripod for anyone, because it depends on the budget, how strong they are, all sorts of stuff.
I'm going to give you a recommendation. If you don't want to spend a lot of money, but you can't cheap out on a tripod. A cheap tripod will fall over and break your camera. It won't hold things steady. And cheap tripods can either weigh a lot or be really flimsy. So stick for a starting point, go to the B&H website, check out Oben tripods, OBEN, and it'll say what the tripod's for, the maximum weight. So you'll know if you have a bigger camera, smaller one. That's a good value. Robust tripods are another good value. And then if you really want the best, you want Gitzo. Gitzo makes the best tripods, and you will pay for it.
All right. Well, let me disagree with David about some things. The weight that it says it can hold is totally bogus. That's a useless bit of information. It's not realistic. Another way to think about it is, I agree, there's an old saw among photographers, and it says everyone always has two tripods. The first one they buy is cheap and light, and after using it a while, they hate it and they throw it away, and then they go out and buy a real one. And so I'm going to just give a ballpark number and say you've got to get a tripod at least in the $150 to $200 range if you want a decent tripod.
Especially with a head, if the head is included.
Right. Yeah. If you get a crappy little head, it's very, very frustrating when you try to do full support.
The truth is that for a serious photographer, a serious practitioner, you're not just going to have one first cheap tripod. You need multiple tripods to do different jobs, especially if you shoot different formats, larger lenses, larger cameras.
But if you invest $200 right now, you'll be fine. That's my recommendation. I own Gitzo tripods. I'm a professional, and the ones I have are 25 years old and still work well. But I'm not suggesting that people have to do that. I want people to get started in a reasonable way.
Okay. You're very reasonable yourself.
More questions.
Okay, more questions. Let's see. Everyone says thank you very much. By the way, I also want to just throw out to you that Jeffrey Falk, who's watching. Jeffrey, how are you? I watched Jeffrey very close as you talked about focus stacking because Jeffrey Falk is like the first guy I ever met who was doing focus stacking. And he didn't fall off of his chair. He agreed with everything you said. So you passed the Jeffrey Falk.
Oh, good.
test.
That was close. Okay.
Okay, hold on a second. Your photo tripod looks good. 3 tripods, but need a more flexible. Victoria Falk has multiple tripods. Yep. So Lee Grant uses a gimbal head, which is traditionally used for long lenses and wildlife photography.
It's not really appropriate for close-up gimbal head.
Yeah, it's not really. And Manfrotto, Platypod. I mean, it's like tripods are all good. Listen, it was great having you and hosting you again, Les. It's always a pleasure. I'm so happy you reached out to me, and thank you for the books. I was looking at my bookshelf and I have like Corrective Photography, the Deerdorf book. I've got Ansel Adams, The Negative, and I've got a lot of how-to serious books, and it's an honor to keep your books next to.
For me to be next to Ansel Adams is an honor.
Indeed. And I want to thank everyone for coming as well today. It was, like I said, it was a full house. We have recorded it, and I'll get it up on YouTube shortly.
Let me mention that, there's a link on my website. There's a link to contact me if you want to send me an email. And I'm happy to deal with any questions if I can with people. Do not ask me what camera to buy or what lens to buy. I will not answer that question, or even what tripod to buy. But if I can be helpful in any way, send me an email and I'll be happy to answer it.
Awesome. All right. So thank you once again, everyone. Thank you incredibly, Les. We hinted at something. We're gonna do another collaboration soon, and beyond the Lightroom thing that we talked about a photo assignment. Have you coming on as official faculty and taking close up and macro work?
We'll do something. David, you're a good guy, and it's really fun working with you.
Takes one to know one. Okay, thank you, everyone. Take care.
Ciao.